a stolen heirloom, a silent monastery, and a rosary that shouldn't exist. Welcome to Agent Ash. I am your host, Hallo. I'd love to know, where are you watching from right now? Your presence here is truly valued. Let's begin the story. The afternoon train from London arrived at Windermere Bay precisely 10 minutes past 4. It exhaled a sigh of steam and steel before groaning to a halt, the polished carriages shuddering gently along the tracks. Among the scattering of fashionable passengers alighting, ladies in linen coats and men with bowler hats tilted against the summer glare, stood one unmistakable figure, a fastidious gentleman in dove-grey spats, a trim moustache shaped with mathematical precision, and a silk handkerchief folded with geometrical harmony. Monsieur Hercule Poirot had arrived. He stepped down from the carriage with practiced care, glancing around the small coastal platform with a narrowed eye. "Charming," he murmured in French, brushing an invisible speck from his sleeve. "But there is something too tranquil." He was met by Inspector Colin Rushworth of the Windermere Constabulary, a lean, wind-weathered man with a red face and sunburnt brow, clearly unused to handling matters of great subtlety. "Monsieur Poirot," Rushworth said, extending a hand awkwardly. "Glad you came on such short notice. It's not often we get someone of your stature in our quiet little parish." Poirot took the hand delicately and inclined his head. "When Lady Bromley asks, one does not decline, especially not when the request is delivered in the handwriting of one in visible distress." Rushworth gestured to the waiting motor car, a Humber super snipe with a polished hood and leather seats that smelled faintly of pipe smoke. As they rode the winding coastal road toward Bromley Hall, the detective listened intently while the inspector briefed him on the strange affair. "It started with a theft," Rushworth said, shifting gears. "A jade rosary, priceless apparently, vanished from Lady Bromley's private prayer cabinet. No signs of forced entry. Households locked down, no strangers about. The servants were vetted, old loyals. Her son, Benedict, had a friend staying the weekend, a Miss Dahlia Kent. They were the only outsiders." Poirot tilted his head. "The object itself, this jade rosary, religious? Sentimental?" "Both," said Rushworth. "Family heirloom going back to the Qing dynasty. Lady Bromley's late husband acquired it during consular years in Shanghai. She keeps it under glass, locked with a brass key she wears on a chain around her neck. She swears it was intact Thursday night. By Friday morning, it was gone." Poirot's eyes glimmered. "Ah, a theft that is not merely material, but strikes at the very heart of devotion. That is where the affair begins, yes?" Rushworth hesitated. "No, monsieur. That was merely the prelude." He glanced at Poirot. "The real trouble began that same evening when the maid, Alice Penwell, was found dead." Poirot turned slowly. "Mon Dieu, you omitted this detail." "Didn't mean to. Just thought it best you heard it while on the way," Rushworth said sheepishly. "She was discovered in the conservatory, fallen backward against the glass-house shelves, cut her head badly, but the coroner says it wasn't the impact that killed her. It was poisoning." Poirot grew silent. The humming of the motor car filled the pause. At last he said, "Then we are dealing with something more grave than a sentimental theft." "And that's not all," Rushworth said, clearing his throat. "Lady Bromley's personal physician, Dr. Edwin Maynard, insists it wasn't suicide. Alice had no known health issues, no reason to be despondent, and there was no suicide note. Besides, it's all too coincidental, isn't it? A priceless heirloom vanishes. Then, one of the staff turns up dead." Within the span of 24 hours, Poirot folded his arms. "Coincidence, mon ami, is merely the name the unimaginative give to patterns they do not yet perceive. Tell me, the maid, how long had she been with the household?" 7 years, Rushworth said. "Started when Lady Bromley's husband passed. Hard-working, discreet. Kept mostly to herself, but no complaints. Had her own room off the west wing, near the housekeeper's. Poirot's brow furrowed. And the guests in the house at the time? Lady Bromley, of course. Her son Benedict returned from Oxford for the weekend. Brought along his friend, Miss Kent. She's a modern sort, very sharp-tongued. Then there's Dr. Maynard, who visits regularly to attend to Lady Bromley's arthritis. And the housekeeper, Mrs. Griffiths. All others are long-standing servants. Poirot tapped a finger to his lips. It is often the case that those who appear most loyal are those whose disloyalty is buried deepest. Let us not discount anyone. The motor car pulled into the long gravel drive of Bromley Hall, a weathered, ivy-clad manor overlooking the grey sea cliffs. The house exuded both history and sorrow, its windows dark and half-curtained, the facade haunted by the winds of the moor. Rushworth cut the engine and opened Poirot's door. "You'll be staying in the east wing. Lady Bromley insisted." Poirot stepped out. "Très bien, but before I take tea or unpack my valise, I should like to examine the scene of the maid's death and see the cabinet from which the Jade Rosary was taken." Rushworth nodded. "You'll have all the access you need." As Poirot ascended the front steps and passed beneath the stone lintel of Bromley Hall, the hairs at the back of his neck stirred. There was something in the air beyond tragedy. It was something colder, calculating, something deliberate. And the Jade Rosary, he suspected, was not the only thing in that house being kept under lock and key. Lady Bromley received Poirot in the blue. Drawing room, seated stiffly in a carved walnut chair, beneath a portrait of her late husband, Lord Edgar Bromley. She wore black silk, despite the summer heat, and the key to her prayer cabinet still hung around her neck on a delicate gold chain. Her eyes were dry, but her fingers fidgeted restlessly over a lace handkerchief in her lap. "It is most grievous, monsieur," she said, voice taut and precise. "The rosary was not just an heirloom. It was my husband's dying gift, a symbol of peace, of legacy, to have it stolen from within my own home. And now poor Alice." Poirot bowed gently. "You have my deepest condolences, madame. May I ask, have you worn the key continuously since the theft?" Her hand moved instinctively to the chain. "I have, always. I sleep with it beneath my pillow. It never leaves me." Poirot's gaze lingered a moment longer, then turned to the sideboard, where a tray of untouched tea had long grown cold. He declined refreshment with a small shake of the head. "I should like to speak to each of the guests and members of the household, if I may," he said, privately. "It is often in the smallest detail that truth reveals herself." Lady Bromley nodded faintly. "You may use the morning room. It faces the sea. Quiet. No one will disturb you." Poirot offered a gracious nod and excused himself, following Inspector Rushworth down a corridor with faded tapestries and thin rugs worn smooth by time. "Quite the fortress of tradition, isn't it?" Rushworth muttered. "I imagine half the house hasn't been redecorated since the coronation." They reached the morning room, a bright space with tall windows and pale sea-green walls. Poirot settled himself in a tufted chair, crossed his legs, and straightened the crease of his trousers before gesturing. "Let us begin. The son first, perhaps." Benedict Rushworth nodded and returned shortly with a young man in his early 20s, thin and angular, with a permanent squint of intellectual fatigue. He wore a rumpled blazer and had the absent-minded air of someone whose mind often wandered faster than the conversation around him. "Benedict Bromley," Poirot said with a small smile. "It is a pleasure." Benedict took the offered seat awkwardly. "Likewise, sir. Though, well, I imagine none of us is really feeling particularly social at the moment." "You were in residence at the time of the theft?" "Yes, I came down from Oxford for the weekend. Brought my friend Dahlia. It was meant to be a quiet little visit. Walks, some reading. But then the rosary vanished, and Alice—" His voice cracked slightly, though he made no effort to hide it. "You were close with the maid?" Benedict hesitated. No, not especially. She was kind to me, always polite, but we didn't converse beyond the usual pleasantries. She kept to herself mostly, lived for her work. And Miss Kent? He blinked. Dahlia? She barely spoke to the staff. She's from London. Very direct. Not exactly the warmest guest, if you take my meaning. She found the whole housekeeper and teacup culture rather stifling. Poirot nodded. And on the night of the theft, where were you? In the library. I was going over a paper I've been preparing on pre-Raphaelite architecture. Lost track of time. I think I turned in around 1. Did you see or hear anything unusual? He hesitated, then looked sheepish. Not related to the rosary, I think, but, well, there was a bit of raised voices down the hallway. Around 11, maybe. I didn't hear words, just the tone. Sharp. 2 people arguing, perhaps. Female voices, I think. Poirot leaned forward. Did you recognize either? Benedict shook his head. Number, though. Dahlia did say something peculiar later, when we were having a nightcap. She said the maid looked frightened earlier that evening. Did she say why? Number, just that she looked shaken, distracted. She was serving tea and dropped a teaspoon on the carpet, which apparently was unlike her. Poirot steepled his fingers. Merci. That is most helpful. Benedict stood and left as Rushworth called for the next, Miss Dahlia Kent. She entered with a confident gait and a tailored yellow dress that caught the sunlight behind her. Her voice was clipped, posh, and disinterested, and her expression implied mild annoyance at the inconvenience of the entire affair. Let me guess, Inspector. You want to know if I murdered the help and made off with an antique necklace? Poirot chuckled gently. Only your recollections, mademoiselle, if you will indulge me. She sighed and crossed one leg over the other. Well, I arrived Thursday afternoon. Tea on the lawn, then dinner. Retired to the guest room by 10. Slept poorly. This house has dreadful insulation. You can hear the ocean inside your teeth. You interacted little with the staff? I prefer not to fuss about, monsieur. I don't need people orbiting me with trays of biscuits. But I did notice the maid. Small girl, mousy, nervous. She spilled a bit of sherry when I handed her my glass. Seemed petrified. You think she was frightened? I know she was. Kept glancing over her shoulder, like someone was watching her, or perhaps she was watching someone. Poirot nodded. And the family? I've known Benedict since prep school. His mother terrifies me. Dr. Maynard is affable, but too quiet. The housekeeper, what's her name? Mrs. Griffiths, stone-faced as a tomb, not a chatty lot. Did you hear any commotion that evening? Number, though, I did think I saw a shadow cross the landing at midnight. Could have been anyone. The light from the hallway filtered oddly under my door. Poirot thanked her. One final question. What do you think happened to Alice Penwell? Dahlia paused, then leaned forward, tone dropping slightly. I think she knew something. Something that wasn't hers to know, and someone decided that made her inconvenient. Poirot's eyes flickered with quiet recognition. Indeed. When she left, Poirot took a moment to jot a note in his small leather notebook, then gestured again. Next came Doctor. Edwin Maynard, a tall man in his late 40s with thinning hair, large spectacles, and a kind, if distracted, demeanour. He greeted Poirot with genuine curiosity. You must be the famed detective. I've read about your cases in the Times. Fascinating work. Poirot smiled. Then you understand why I must ask. What was your relationship to the deceased? Alice? She was healthy, quiet, no signs of depression, no unusual medical complaints. I treated her twice for seasonal allergies and once for a sprained ankle, otherwise fit as a fiddle. And yet she died of poisoning. Maynard nodded gravely. It's quite troubling. Aconitine, from what the coroner tells me. not a substance one easily stumbles across in a kitchen cupboard. Poirot tilted his head. So it was introduced deliberately? Undoubtedly. And it acts fast, within minutes. Nausea, heart palpitations, convulsions. Terrible way to go. Where would one acquire such a poison? Maynard shrugged. Monkshood. Grows in many English gardens, but someone would need to extract it, concentrate it. That's no accident. It was murder, plain and simple. Poirot studied him for a long moment. Merci, doctor. Finally came Mrs. Griffiths, the housekeeper. She was stout, middle-aged, with a stern jaw and hands perpetually wringing at a folded cloth. Her loyalty to Lady Bromley was evident in every syllable. "I don't believe anyone in this house would harm Alice," she said firmly. "She was quiet, obedient, God-fearing, never stepped out of line. That girl wouldn't take a sweet without permission." "Did she confide in you?" "Number, but I did find her once crying in the linen room a few days ago. Said she'd dropped one of Lady Bromley's brooches and feared she'd be dismissed. I assured her it would be fine." Poirot gave a small nod, then paused. "Was anything unusual the morning she was found?" Mrs. Griffiths hesitated. "Her bedroom window was open. She never left it open overnight. She hated drafts. Made her asthma flare." Poirot's brow furrowed. "Did anyone else know this?" "No one who'd reason to care." The interviews concluded. Poirot stood at the window overlooking the cliffs, watching the grey sea shift in its restless dance. Behind him, the house seemed to breathe with secrets, some dormant, some trembling just beneath the surface. A stolen rosary, a frightened maid, a poison no one should have, a guest who speaks in riddles, a window open against habit, and voices in the night. He turned to Rushworth at last. "Tell me, mon ami, where was the body found exactly?" Rushworth blinked. "In the conservatory." "Why?" Poirot's moustache twitched. "Because I believe Alice Penwell never intended to enter the conservatory at all." Rushworth stared at Poirot, uncertain whether he'd heard correctly. "You don't think she meant to go into the conservatory?" Poirot turned from the window, his gaze narrowing as if adjusting the lens of a telescope. "No, my friend. The conservatory is at the far end of the west wing, quite distant from the servant quarters. There is no reason for a maid to be there at such an hour, unless she was led there." Rushworth shifted uneasily. "You think she was summoned?" Poirot tapped his fingertips together. "Not summoned, lured. And I believe she came there believing she would speak in confidence, or make a confession, perhaps even a tryst. But what awaited her instead was death." They left the morning room and retraced their steps down the stone-flagged corridor, Poirot's gaze sweeping every crevice with surgical precision. When they reached the conservatory, the atmosphere seemed immediately different, warmer, denser, perfumed with the scent of orchids and damp soil. Afternoon sunlight filtered through frosted panes, casting pale green shadows on the tiled floor. "This is where she was found?" Poirot asked softly. Rushworth nodded. "Back there, against the shelf with the flower pots. She must have hit her head on the iron support. But as I said, the poison was what killed her." Poirot walked the length of the room slowly. His eyes lingered not on the obvious, where the body had fallen, but on the edges. He stopped before a half-concealed alcove, lined with climbing ivy, and an aged armchair sunk into a patch of worn carpet. "Curious," Poirot murmured, crouching slightly to inspect a thin ring of porcelain on the floor. He picked it up delicately, a shattered handle from a teacup. "Inspector," he said over his shoulder, "was Alice in the habit of taking her tea in this room?" Rushworth frowned. "Number the staff have a separate hall. This room's for the family." Poirot stood, his brow furrowing. "Then how did this come here? And why only one fragment? If she dropped a cup in fright or pain, there should be more pieces. This was placed here after the fact, Or perhaps only this piece was taken away. Rushworth blinked. You think the killer removed the rest? None. I think someone collected it, and left only this as a message, or a mistake. Poirot paced slowly back toward the central table. A watering can sat atop it, half full. A pair of shears lay nearby, and on the low shelf beneath, a thick gardening ledger. Poirot flipped it open, scanning the entries. Hydrangeas pruned, roses rotated. Ah, here. Monk's hood relocated to shaded potting bed, marked as potentially toxic. He looked up. Do you recall who tends this room, Inspector? That'd be Timothy Green, gardener for the estate. Been here 20 years. Quiet as a grave. Poirot's expression sharpened. I should like to speak with him next, but not before I visit the maids' quarters. They passed again through the long corridor and turned into the narrower staff wing, cooler, less ornate, the scent of lavender polish giving way to starch and iron. Alice Penwell's room was small, but impeccably neat, the bed still turned down from the constable's earlier inspection. A crucifix hung on the wall above a worn copy of Pilgrim's Progress. Beside the lamp, a silver locket lay unopened. Poirot picked it up gently and opened it. Inside, 2 small photographs, a young boy and girl, perhaps 10 and 12, and beneath them, a pressed violet. The corner of his mouth softened. Family, perhaps, but who? She had no known siblings. Rushworth shrugged. Orphans, I think. No relations listed on her forms. Poirot peered into the drawer and drew out a folded envelope, sealed but never posted. He did not open it, but studied the back. It bore no stamp, just a name, written in looping script, Mrs. Bromley, private. Poirot raised an eyebrow. A letter never delivered, hidden instead. A cry of conscience, or perhaps a last resort. He slipped the envelope into his breast pocket. We shall see what Lady Bromley has to say. But now, the gardener. Timothy Green was found near the orchard, trimming a hedge with slow, deliberate movements. He was a squat man in his 60s, weathered, his cap low over tired eyes. He nodded to Poirot, but seemed uneasy. You were the one who last handled the monk's hood? Poirot asked without preamble. The gardener nodded. Yes, sir. Dangerous plant. Pretty, but it bites. I moved it last Monday. Thought it'd do better in the shade. Logged it in the ledger, like always. Did anyone ask you about it? He scratched his chin. Well, Doctor, Maynard stopped by the next day. Asked about garden toxins in general. Said Lady Bromley's arthritis treatments had made her curious. I gave him the list. Monk's hood, foxglove, nightshade. Normal caution, I figured. Poirot's eyebrows arched. Interesting. And did anyone else come to you? Any of the staff? Timothy hesitated, eyes flicking to the ground. Alice did. Poirot's stillness became absolute. What did she say? She asked if any of the plants could make a person unwell. I told her to stay clear of monk's hood. Bad stuff. She looked pale. I thought she was worried about the cats getting into it. And when was this? Night before she died, just before sunset. Poirot gave a slow nod. Merci. That is most helpful. They returned to the house in silence. Poirot went directly to his room and retrieved the envelope from his pocket, setting it beside the silver locket. He hesitated, then carefully broke the seal. The letter inside was short, written in a trembling hand. My lady, I have done something I must confess. It concerns the rosary. I did not mean to betray your trust. I only wanted to protect someone. There was no theft, only fear. I cannot say more here, but I beg you to forgive me. In time. Poirot sat back, folding the letter. Not stolen, he murmured, but hidden. To protect. And suddenly the lines spoken by Miss Kent echoed back to him. She looked frightened, kept looking over her shoulder. Poirot's eyes narrowed. There was a reason Alice Penwell never intended to enter the conservatory. She had been lured there under false pretenses, and now someone in the house was pretending it had all been theft and madness and coincidence. But Poirot had begun to glimpse the edges of the truth, and he suspected the Jade Rosary, the poison, and the unopened letter were threads of the same tapestry. He only needed to pull gently, and the entire design would reveal itself. The next morning dawned grey and expectant, the sea groaning beneath a low mist as if burdened by secrets. Poirot sat alone in the library, freshly shaven and buttoned, sipping his customary tisane from a porcelain cup that bore the Bromley family crest. Before him, on the desk, lay three objects: the broken teacup handle from the conservatory, the letter from Alice, and a notepad on which he had neatly written the names of every person in the house, underlined and arranged into pairs, then repaired again into different constellations. It was a game of psychological geometry, examining which minds might intersect with betrayal, guilt, or fear. Rushworth entered quietly and closed the door behind him. "I sent the letter for handwriting comparison, just as you asked," he said. "Might take a day, but I doubt it'll reveal much. That girl didn't strike me as deceptive." Poirot smiled faintly. "Oh, but Inspector, deception takes many forms. Some are done out of malice, others out of love." Rushworth gave a grunt, unconvinced. "And where do you place the rosary now?" "Hidden, as the girl claimed." Poirot nodded. "Yes, I believe Alice hid it. The question is for whom and why. I do not think she intended to keep it for herself. No, her fear was not of being caught as a thief, but as a protector who failed." "Protecting who?" Poirot tapped the edge of his cup. "That, my friend, is what we must determine. And to do so, I shall need one more conversation with Lady Bromley herself." He stood, gathering the letter and the locket, and made his way once more to the blue drawing-room. This time, Lady Bromley stood at the window, her hands clasped behind her back, spine rigid beneath a shawl of ivory lace. "You received my note?" she asked without turning. "Not from you, madame," Poirot replied gently, "but addressed to you. It was never sent." He offered the folded letter. She took it without a word, unfolded it slowly, and read in silence. Her only visible reaction was a slight tremor in her right hand, which she stilled by placing it over the other. "I had wondered," she said finally. "I had sensed something was wrong. Alice had been uneasy for days. I thought perhaps she had made a mistake, broken something. But now it seems she carried a burden greater than I imagined." Poirot stepped forward. "She writes that she did not steal the rosary, that she only wished to protect someone. I believe this is the heart of it all, a lie to shield another, and it cost her her life." Lady Bromley turned, her eyes sharp now beneath their surface sorrow. "Do you believe someone in this house killed her?" "I do, and I believe that person wanted to ensure her silence remained permanent. It was not only the rosary that vanished, it was trust. And now, madame, I must ask you a difficult question, one that touches on the private affairs of your household." "You may ask," she said. Poirot held up the locket. "This was found in her room. Children, perhaps relatives, but no family is listed. Do you know who they are?" Lady Bromley stared at the photos, and a trace of colour rose in her cheeks. "Yes," she said softly, "that was Alice's secret, but not one of shame. The boy and girl, Tom and Clara, they are the children of my late sister's maid, Alice's cousin. When their mother died, I offered to help raise them. But it would not do for society to think I kept orphans in the house, even under the guise of charity. So Alice took a position here and asked that they be placed in a boarding home nearby. She visited on her Sundays off." Poirot absorbed this in silence. A motive to protect and to fear. If she discovered something compromising, something criminal, she would know that exposure might endanger not just her place here, but the children's security. Lady Bromley sank into the chair beneath her husband's portrait. She came to me 2 days before she died. She looked haunted. I pressed her, but she only said, "It's not what it seems, my lady. But I can't yet speak." I thought she might have seen something between Benedict and Miss Kent, perhaps an indiscretion. But now she trailed off. Poirot folded his hands. "I must ask for your discretion, madam. Until I have finished my inquiries, do not speak of the letter. Let the household continue unaware that I know." Lady Bromley nodded slowly. Poirot left her and returned to the west wing, this time seeking out Benedict. He found the young man on the terrace, hunched over a notebook, with a pair of binoculars beside him. "Bird watching, monsieur?" Poirot asked, sitting opposite. Benedict looked up, startled. "Oh, yes, it's a habit. Helps with focus. I can't seem to concentrate inside. Too many footsteps." "You are troubled?" Benedict hesitated. "It's not just Alice. It's the way the house feels now. Like everyone's pretending. Dahlia's sharp with the servants. Dr. Maynard barely speaks. And I don't trust Mrs. Griffiths. She's loyal, yes, but blind." Poirot considered this. "You trust your friend Miss Kent?" Benedict gave a wry smile. "I admire her. But, trust, she's clever enough to lie well. Even to me." Poirot nodded slowly. "Benedict, what if I told you the rosary was never stolen, but hidden?" Benedict blinked. "Hidden? By who?" "I believe by Alice. Out of fear. Perhaps she saw something she wasn't supposed to. I wonder, could it have been something you yourself also noticed?" There was a pause. Poirot waited. Finally, Benedict said, "2 nights before the theft, I saw Dr. Maynard slip something into a drawer in the study. He looked pale. I asked what he was doing. He said it was nothing, just moving Lady Bromley's pain medication. But he wasn't carrying the medicine. He was carrying a letter." Poirot's eyes glinted. "Did you see it?" "Number." But he seemed rattled, and Alice must have seen something too. She often dusted in there in the morning. Poirot stood. "Thank you. One last thing. Do you believe your mother truly trusts Dr. Maynard?" Benedict paused. "She did once. Now, I think, she tolerates him. She finds dependence irritating." Poirot bowed. "That is most enlightening." Back in the study, Poirot waited until evening, when the household was at supper. He examined the desk meticulously. The drawer Maynard had used opened smoothly, and beneath a false bottom he found a slim sheet of paper. The letter was written on Doctor, Maynard's notepaper. It was a prescription, unsigned. It listed the name of a compound, aconitine extract, 0.03 milligrams. Poirot studied it in silence. The dosage was precise, not enough to kill in one dose, but enough, if concentrated, to cause cumulative poisoning, or to mask preparation of a fatal version. He folded the paper and slipped it into his pocket, his mind spinning through the implications. Maynard had access. He had motive, if he were hiding something, and he had opportunity. But motive, Poirot knew, was never so straightforward. The maid had not been the target of greed, but of fear. She had become a liability, and now, with the letter, the prescription, and the fragments of contradiction gathering like dust in the corners of a sealed room, Poirot knew the killer's design was beginning to show. He would need just one more conversation, a subtle push, a test of nerves. Then, when the liar trembled, he would strike. The following morning, Poirot rose before sunrise. The hallways of Bromley Hall were still and cold, the hush of sleep resting over the manor like frost. But he was fully dressed, shoes polished, tie fixed with exquisite symmetry. He had long ago learned that the most delicate operations of truth often required precision in both appearance and timing. He descended to the study just as the housekeeper was beginning her rounds. A silver tray clinked somewhere in the pantry, a door creaked open upstairs, but no voices yet filled the air. This was the hour he needed. He placed the unsigned prescription on the desk, right where Dr. Maynard would see it. Then he returned to the morning room and waited, perched near the window, out of view but with full line of sight to the study door. At precisely 8 minutes past 7, the doctor entered. Poirot observed him closely. Maynard froze for half a second upon seeing the slip of paper, then stepped forward quickly and snatched it up. His expression was unreadable, but his hand trembled faintly. He folded the note, slipped it into his breast pocket, and turned, only to find Poirot already behind him. "You dropped something, Monsieur le Docteur," Poirot said lightly. Maynard jumped, then forced a smile. "Oh, Monsieur Poirot, you startled me." Poirot did not return the smile. "I must confess, I find your presence in this study most convenient, and your concealment of a prescription for aconitine unfortunate." Maynard stiffened. "It's not what it seems." Poirot lifted a brow. "No? Then please, tell me precisely what it is, why you had a record of that compound, unsigned, unfiled, and why you hid it in this drawer." Maynard hesitated. "Lady Bromley suffers from neuralgic pain in the winter. I was researching alternatives. The compound is dangerous, yes, but in theory—" "In theory," Poirot cut in smoothly, "you are a man of medicine. In practice, you are a man who has withheld information, obscured your access to a deadly poison, and visited the gardener with questions about toxic flora days before a maid was killed." The doctor's expression collapsed into a weary resignation. "You think I poisoned her?" "I think," Poirot said quietly, "you were afraid, and I think someone used that fear." Maynard sank into a nearby chair. "She came to me the night before she died," he said, his voice suddenly raw. "Alice. She confronted me about a bottle she found in the servants' stair cupboard. A tincture bottle, unlabelled. She thought it belonged to Lady Bromley, that I had given her something unapproved, but I hadn't. I checked my ledger. Nothing was missing. I told her that. She didn't believe me. Said someone else had access. Did you see the bottle? Number she said she took it, but then lost it. Or hid it. She was scared. I tried to calm her down, offered to go to Lady Bromley with her. She said she needed one more night." Poirot's gaze remained steady. "But that night, she died." Maynard stared at his hands. "I should have gone straight to Lady Bromley myself. But if it wasn't mine, then whose? I was afraid I'd be blamed. And now it looks worse than ever." Poirot nodded slowly. "You understand, Doctor, that fear does not excuse deceit, but it does not make you a murderer." The doctor looked up, hope flickering faintly in his eyes. "Then you believe me?" Poirot gave no answer, only extended a hand toward the door. "For now, monsieur, you will remain in the house. Do not leave, and speak to no one." Maynard left with hunched shoulders and a heavy gait. Poirot returned to the morning room, where Rushworth was waiting with folded arms and a scowl. "You're too gentle with him," the inspector muttered. "He's hiding something. I'd have had him in custody by now." Poirot sat and crossed one leg over the other. "Ah, mon ami, that is the difference between us. You arrest a man for what you see. I watch what he hides. And I do not yet believe Maynard to be the hand behind Alice's death." "Then who?" Poirot looked out toward the misty cliffs. "That is what I intend to discover. And I believe the next piece lies not in motive, but in misdirection." He requested that the housekeeper summon Mrs. Griffiths next. The woman arrived promptly, her posture military, her mouth pursed. "Good morning, madame," Poirot began warmly. "Forgive the intrusion, but I have one small matter I wish clarified." She gave a curt nod. "Of course, monsieur. You were quite close to Alice, were you not?" "I trained her myself," Mrs. Griffith said. "She came to us with little more than polish and fear, but she had a fine instinct for detail. The girl was made for service, never complained, never gossiped." Then I wonder, madame, did she confide in you in those final days? Mrs. Griffiths hesitated. Not directly, but she was not herself. Flustered, distracted. I found her twice, once near the silver drawer, just standing, once in the upstairs linen hall, crying. She said something about betrayal where you don't expect it. I pressed her, but she shook her head and fled. Poirot studied her face. And you did not report this? She asked me not to, said she needed time. A generous risk, madame. Mrs. Griffiths's jaw twitched. She deserved the chance. Poirot gave a slight nod. One final question. Who has access to the prayer cabinet key besides Lady Bromley? No one, she said without hesitation. The key never leaves her neck. And yet the rosary was removed. Mrs. Griffiths said nothing, but her eyes moved ever so slightly to the side. Poirot stood. Thank you, madam. That will be all. He returned to Rushworth with renewed energy. Prepare the drawing-room, he said briskly. I want all the guests and household members gathered within the hour. Rushworth blinked. Now? Yes, Poirot said, eyes gleaming. Now. The game has reached its final turn. As the household assembled, the atmosphere grew taut, expectant. Poirot stood before the fireplace, his hands folded neatly, his expression one of calm certainty. My friends, he said softly, I have asked you here not to accuse, but to explain. A terrible crime has been committed, one that touches not only upon death, but upon fear, loyalty, and betrayal. He turned to Lady Bromley. Madame, your rosary was never stolen. It was hidden, by someone who loved this household too much to see it unravel. Alice Penwell discovered something that terrified her. He gestured toward Maynard. She suspected the doctor of wrongdoing, but she was wrong. He moved next to Mrs. Griffiths. She trusted the housekeeper with her fears, but not with her evidence. And then his gaze settled finally on Dahlia Kent. Mademoiselle, he said gently, you told us Alice was afraid, that she spilled your sherry, that she looked over her shoulder. She raised an eyebrow. I did. But you left out one detail, Poirot continued, that you were in the conservatory the night she died. She tilted her head. Was I? Poirot stepped closer. You were seen by the gardener, who did not think it odd at the time, but you were also heard by Benedict. Two voices arguing, female voices. Dahlia's face hardened. You confronted Alice. She had found the tincture bottle, not the doctor's, yours, extracted from the monk's hood, prepared with amateur hands, perhaps during one of your stifling afternoons. You were curious, experimental, perhaps foolish. But Alice, devout and frightened, knew it could be lethal. She threatened to reveal it. You panicked. You have no proof, Dahlia said sharply. No? Poirot reached into his pocket and drew out the letter from Alice. She did not name you, but she left this for Lady Bromley. And the broken teacup handle? It matches the set in your guest room. There was a second cup in the conservatory. You were there. Dahlia rose to her feet. It wasn't murder. I just meant to scare her. I thought if she'd meet me, talk, I could explain. But she panicked. She slipped, hit her head. Poirot nodded solemnly. But you used poison. Whether by intention or accident, she died by your hand. The room was silent. Then Lady Bromley stood slowly. Get out, she said to Dahlia, her voice low and final, before I forget my dignity. Rushworth stepped forward, handcuffs at the ready, but Dahlia only sank back into her chair, her face pale, her expression blank. Poirot turned away. The mystery, at last, had uncoiled itself, not with noise, but with the silent inevitability of guilt surfacing from beneath layers of denial. It was over. Almost. The room remained frozen for a long moment, as though even time hesitated to exhale. Lady Bromley stood tall beside her late husband's portrait, her hand clenched tightly around the chain that held the key to the prayer cabinet. Dr. Maynard removed his spectacles and rubbed his face, as though he'd aged 10 years in the last 10 minutes. Benedict looked stunned, his eyes wide and searching, as if hoping for some flaw in Poirot's reasoning that would render it all untrue. And Dahlia Kent, still seated, chin high despite her pallor, sat in silence, no longer defending herself, only absorbing the weight of exposure. Rushworth broke the silence first, stepping forward with measured steps. "Miss Kent, I'm placing you under arrest for the unlawful killing of Alice Penwell." His voice was neither harsh nor gloating, merely solemn. Dahlia offered no resistance, only glanced once at Benedict, who looked away. As Rushworth read her rights and led her from the drawing-room, Poirot turned slowly, lifting the letter once more. He walked over to Lady Bromley and handed it back with both hands. "I believe she meant for you to understand the heart of it," he said softly. "That she never betrayed you. Not truly." Lady Bromley took it, her hand steadier now than it had been when she'd first received it. She folded the letter slowly and tucked it into her sleeve. "She will not be forgotten," she said, her voice distant but not cold. "I will see to that." Poirot nodded. "She showed a courage many would not, and in doing so, she protected this household more than you realize." He turned back toward Benedict, who still stood frozen near the window. The young man looked up at Poirot, his expression clouded. "How did she even get the poison?" he asked. "She didn't have any background in that sort of thing." "She was curious," Poirot replied, "and too clever for her own safety. I suspect she discovered the gardener's log. Monkshood is not hard to find if you're looking for danger disguised in beauty. She extracted it herself, probably in small quantities. At first, it was a game, perhaps even a form of self-importance to wield such knowledge. But when Alice found the bottle, she panicked," Benedict finished. "She thought her future was threatened." Poirot met his eyes. "She thought your future was threatened. She feared the letter, the maid's confession, might expose more than curiosity. You were close, yes?" Benedict hesitated. "She was kind to me, but no more than that. We weren't involved. She looked at me like I still had some innocence left." Poirot nodded thoughtfully. "That, monsieur, is a rare and powerful kind of affection. It may explain why she took such great risks." Dr. Maynard approached, standing beside the fireplace with slouched shoulders. "I owe her a great debt," he said. "I misjudged her. I thought she was meddling, overreacting. I didn't see her strength." Poirot looked at him with a softer expression than before. "Then ensure her name is not erased. Speak of her with truth, and ensure the next time someone raises a quiet alarm, you listen more closely." The room slowly began to empty. Mrs. Griffiths returned to her duties, saying nothing, but casting a lingering look of guilt in Poirot's direction. Benedict excused himself quietly and wandered out into the fog-draped gardens, leaving behind only the faint scuff of shoes on stone. Poirot remained, gazing at the empty chair where Dahlia had sat. He thought of the broken teacup handle, the trembling prescription, the little crucifix above the maid's bed. The pieces had been scattered so deliberately, each shaped like misdirection, each curved just enough to mislead. But in the end, it was the human heart that betrayed the truth, as it so often did. Not a footprint, nor a fingerprint, nor a smudge of ash. Later that evening, after a modest supper taken in silence, Poirot walked the coastal path behind the estate, hands behind his back, his moustache stiff against the wind. The sea stretched endlessly before him, the waves rolling in slow, murmuring syllables. The clouds above had begun to lift, revealing a dull gold line at the horizon where the last of the day retreated. He was joined some minutes later by Lady Bromley, her shawl drawn tightly around her. For a moment, they walked side by side, without speaking. "I used to think," she said eventually, "that the greatest danger to this family would come from outside. The world changes too quickly now. It grows more vulgar, less reverent. But I see now that it is not change that threatens us. It is silence, things unsaid, warnings ignored." Poirot glanced at her. "And pride, perhaps." "Yes," she said. "Yes, that too." They reached a bench that overlooked the jagged cliffs. Lady Bromley lowered herself with careful grace. Poirot remained standing, his gaze fixed on the sea. "There's something else, isn't there?" she said suddenly. "Something you haven't told the others." Poirot was silent for a beat. Then, "Yes, but it is not a danger, only a truth. Alice did not find the rosary by accident. She was shown where it was hidden, by someone who trusted her more than they trusted their own parent." Lady Bromley blinked, a shadow crossing her features. "Benedict. He did not intend harm," Poirot said, "but I believe he suspected Miss Kent had designs on the rosary. Perhaps he overheard something. Perhaps she said too much. He knew he could not confront her without causing scandal. So he took it quietly and gave it to Alice. She hid it and promised to keep it secret." Lady Bromley closed her eyes for a long moment. "He should have come to me." Poirot's tone was gentle. "You raised him to be proud, madame, and quiet. He obeyed too well." She nodded slowly. "Then perhaps it is time to unlearn pride. I will speak to him tomorrow, and I will restore Alice's name. The children she cared for, they will be moved here, to the estate. They will be known as family." Poirot's moustache twitched with approval. "That is a fine decision, madame." She looked at him. "And you? Will you stay the night?" Poirot smiled. "Alas, no. The next train to London departs before dawn, and there are other mysteries in need of tending." They sat a moment longer, and then he bowed slightly and turned away. By the time the first light touched the chapel spire at Windermere Station, Poirot was already aboard. His valise was neatly packed, his hat brim level, his gloves perfectly pressed. He did not look back at the cliffs, or the hall, or the sea. Instead, he sat peacefully in his compartment and closed his eyes, as if already halfway to the next shadowed drawing-room, the next locked cabinet, the next soul with something to hide. For that, he knew, was the true terrain of crime, not the dagger or the poison or the missing jewel, but the tremor in the voice, the flicker in the eyes, the moment the lie crumbles into truth. And it was in such moments that Hercule Poirot would always find his way. The train rattled steadily through the waking countryside, past hedgerows blurred by mist and early sun. Inside the compartment, Poirot sat utterly still. To any passer-by he might have appeared asleep, but in truth his eyes were merely closed in reflection. The investigation at Bromley Hall had reached its conclusion. Yes, justice served, wrongs acknowledged, but in Poirot's mind certain threads still pulled, faint yet persistent, not of doubt, but of understanding left incomplete. His thoughts turned again to Alice Penwell. There was a clarity in her choice that had struck him more deeply than he had admitted. She had not simply been a frightened girl holding a secret. She had acted with purpose, intention. Every step she took, the concealment of the rosary, the unfinished letter, even the hesitation to accuse directly, had been calibrated to protect someone else. It was not cowardice. It was discretion, shaped by loyalty. She had chosen silence over spectacle, subtlety over confrontation, and she had paid for it. Poirot opened his eyes. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew the letter she had never posted. He reread it slowly. This time, he noticed a detail that had eluded him before. The phrasing, "It concerns the rosary. I did not mean to betray your trust. I only wanted to protect someone. Someone, not something. Not herself. And not, Poirot realized. Just Benedict. There had been another. Poirot's brows drew together. What if Dahlia Kent had not acted alone? What if her confidence came not only from cleverness, but from protection? A shared knowledge? He recalled her calm during the final confrontation. Not panicked, not scrambling to construct a lie, but composed, controlled, as though she had long prepared for that moment, or had always known it might come. Poirot stood, smoothing his jacket. He walked the length of the train to the telegraph office car and dictated a short message for Inspector Rushworth back at Windermere. Re-examine guest room shared by Kent. Search thoroughly for missing tincture bottle and any correspondence. Instruct gardener to recheck potting shed for recent soil disturbance. P. He returned to his compartment, but did not sit. The calm had lifted. Something unseen still clung to the affair, like mist to the glass. The murder had been uncovered, but the motive, its deepest layer, remained too simple, too tidy. The train whistled as it approached its next station. Poirot did not disembark, but he noted the signalman's post and the path of the rising sun. He paced the compartment once, twice, and then he remembered something else. The bottle that Alice claimed to have found in the servants' stair cupboard. It had never been recovered. No one had found it after her death, and if Dahlia had not panicked, if she had planned more than just a confrontation, why leave evidence behind? Unless she hadn't. Unless someone else had removed it afterward. Poirot's fingers curled around the brass handle of the window. He opened it slightly, letting the wind strike his face, then turned back to the leather seat. His mind was assembling pieces again, rapidly now. Alice had told someone. Not Lady Bromley, not Maynard, not even Mrs. Griffiths. Could it have been Benedict? Number too close to the situation, too likely to act rashly. Then who? Poirot's eyes narrowed. He remembered a small moment, perhaps forgettable to anyone else. The housekeeper, Mrs. Griffiths, in the morning room, her eyes flicking away when asked about the key. Her silence had been painted as loyalty, but it could also be guilt. He returned to the letter. I only wanted to protect someone. Someone in danger. Someone whose actions could bring shame not just upon themselves, but upon the household. What if it wasn't Benedict? What if Alice had discovered that Mrs. Griffiths had known about the poison all along? Or worse, supplied it? That was too far. But perhaps Mrs. Griffiths had assisted in the cover-up after the fact. Perhaps she had been the one who removed the bottle. Not to protect the killer, but to protect the family. He closed the letter and slid it back into his coat. A porter appeared at the door. Next stop, reading, monsieur. Poirot nodded. Merci. As the train slowed, he stepped onto the platform and made his way to the nearest telephone box. 10 minutes later, he had spoken to Rushworth. 10 more, and his return journey was arranged. Poirot was going back to Bromley Hall. By the time he arrived that evening, the mood in the house had shifted. The shock of Dahlia's arrest had worn off, replaced by a brittle normalcy. The rooms were quieter, the staff more subdued. Rushworth greeted him with furrowed brow and raised hands. I did what you asked, nothing in the guest room, but the gardener did find something. Poirot followed him down the path to the potting shed. There, in the far corner beneath a fresh layer of loam, they unearthed a small glass bottle, corked, empty. The inside bore faint traces of an oily residue. Poirot lifted it with gloved hands. And the soil, any prints? Wiped clean, Rushworth said. But the gardener noticed something strange. The shed was relocked the day after Dahlia was arrested. He'd left it open, but found it padlocked again. And he's the only one with the key. Poirot's eyes darkened. Then someone else had a copy, or had always known where the spare was hidden. They returned to the house. Poirot went straight to the servant corridor and knocked on the door of Mrs. Griffiths's quarters. She answered with her usual composure. "Monsieur Poirot, I thought you had departed." "I did, but I returned." She stepped aside to let him in, eyes watchful. Poirot entered and stood in the modest, tidy room. Photographs of the staff from years past lined the mantel. A well-kept Bible lay on the bedside table. He turned. "You were fond of Alice, madame." "I was," she said. "She was the best I trained." "And yet you removed the bottle from the cupboard after her death." Her expression didn't flicker. "I don't know what you mean." "I believe you do," Poirot said quietly. "You found it. You knew what it meant, and you knew what would happen if it was discovered. You buried it in the potting shed, not to conceal the killer's identity, but to preserve the family's reputation. You thought the mystery would be solved without it. You were wrong." Mrs. Griffiths was silent for a long time. At last, she sat down heavily on the edge of her bed. "She came to me," she said, her voice low. "That morning. She said she'd found something terrible, but she didn't want to ruin the household. I asked her who it was. She wouldn't say, just that she was going to write to Lady Bromley. She didn't want the police involved." Poirot's voice was gentle. "You tried to protect her." "I tried to protect all of them," she whispered. "Even after she died, I thought, if I hid it, if I cleaned it away, maybe it would end, maybe Dahlia would leave, maybe the family would heal." Poirot stepped closer. "Madame, justice is not only for the living, it is also for the dead, and the truth cannot heal when buried." She looked up at him, tears finally breaking past the corners of her eyes. "I'm sorry," she whispered. He nodded once. "I know." Outside, the night wind stirred the ivy around the eaves. Poirot stood in the corridor a moment longer before descending the stairs. The case was finished now, not merely closed, but complete. Every lie brought into light, every silence given voice. Back in the drawing-room, Lady Bromley waited. Poirot entered quietly. She stood. "It was her, wasn't it, Mrs. Griffiths? She did not kill Alice," Poirot said, "but she concealed part of the truth, out of misguided loyalty." Lady Bromley nodded slowly. "We are a house built on silence, but not any more." Poirot inclined his head. "Then perhaps now, madame, the healing can begin." And at last it did. The next morning brought with it a strange quiet, not of tension, but of aftermath, the kind that hangs in the air after the storm has passed and the wreckage has been measured. Bromley Hall, which only days before had been a stage for deception and quiet dread, now breathed differently. The corridors no longer whispered, the walls no longer watched. Yet beneath the surface of this calm, Poirot sensed the final contours of resolution were still taking shape. One last chapter remained, not of guilt, but of grace. He took breakfast alone in the morning room, a modest spread of toast, eggs and tea, laid out by a footman who moved carefully, as if unsure whether the house had truly returned to order. Poirot, precise as ever, buttered his toast without haste, yet his eyes were distant, focused inward. It was not his habit to linger once a case had been solved. He preferred swift departures, a clean closure. But this time, something kept him tethered. Not unfinished facts, but unfinished healing. At 8:45 he heard the soft footfalls he'd been expecting. Lady Bromley entered, draped in dark mauve, and wearing the same ivory lace shawl she had worn on the night of the confrontation. She did not greet him with formality, nor with pleasantries. Instead, she sat directly opposite him, placing her hands on the edge of the table, steady but ungloved. "My son has told me everything," she said simply. Poirot looked up, unsurprised. "Everything?" She nodded. "About the rosary, about Alice, about how he asked her to hide it, and why." Poirot's gaze remained gentle but firm. "And what did you feel, madame, hearing it?" Lady Bromley did not answer immediately. She reached instead into the folds of her sleeve and retrieved the now creased letter from Alice. She laid it between them. "I felt shame," she said, "not for what he did, but for what I failed to see, that my son feared he could not come to me, that a girl I trusted could die trying to protect this family from itself." Poirot placed his teacup gently on its saucer. "Families are complex creatures, madame. They are built upon generations of silence, as much as upon tradition. One does not undo such things in a week, but one may begin." She nodded slowly. "I intend to." Then, with a faint breath, "I've written to the children Alice cared for. Their schoolmistress confirmed their names and condition. I shall bring them here next week. They will be given guardianship under my estate. They will not live in charity, but in dignity." Poirot allowed a trace of warmth to pass his expression. "Then she will not have died in vain." Lady Bromley looked down at the letter again. "I wonder," she said softly, "what Alice might have become had she lived. I saw her only as a servant, but she had a mind and a heart greater than I gave her credit for." "She had courage," Poirot said, "and a sense of justice as fine as any I have seen in a courtroom." They sat in silence for a time, the ticking of the mantel clock the only sound between them. Eventually she rose. "Will you remain until the children arrive?" Poirot shook his head gently. "Alas, no. My work here is done, and I must leave before the world begins to confuse justice with ceremony." Lady Bromley hesitated, then extended her hand. He took it lightly. "I will not forget her," she said. Poirot bowed. "Nor shall I." He spent the next hour making quiet farewells. Dr. Maynard met him near the front hall, his manner humble and subdued. "I've resigned from my regular duties here," he said. "It's time I practiced medicine elsewhere, in the villages perhaps. Less pride, more need." Poirot nodded. "An admirable course. But do not carry guilt that is not yours, doctor. There are lessons born of sorrow that may yet save lives." Benedict found him as he was descending the last stair. He looked more composed now, though something guarded still lingered behind his eyes. "You knew, didn't you," he said, "that it wasn't just Dahlia, that I asked Alice to hide the rosary?" Poirot stopped on the step, turning to meet him eye to eye. "I suspected, but I waited to be sure you would tell your mother yourself." Benedict exhaled, half a sigh, half a laugh. "You could have used it against me." Poirot gave a small shrug. "But what purpose would that have served? Your motives were not malicious. They were protective, ill-advised perhaps, but born of conscience." Benedict looked down. "I still don't know if I was protecting her, or myself." Poirot placed a hand on the banister. "In truth, young man, we rarely know where the boundary lies, but it is in the trying, in the attempt to do right, that we find out who we are." Benedict swallowed and nodded. "Thank you, Monsieur Poirot." Poirot offered a faint smile. "You will do better now. I believe that." He departed without fanfare. No carriage saw him off, no staff lined the drive. Only the quiet sound of the gate creaking closed behind him, and the distant call of seabirds rising over the cliffs. At the station, as he waited for the return train to London, Poirot opened his notebook one final time. In his elegant script, he wrote a single line: "Alice Penwell, truth-teller, silent martyr. She solved more than a crime. She redeemed a household." He paused, then added, "and reminded Hercule Poirot that not all detectives wear moustaches." He closed the book, folded his hands, and waited for the whistle to sound. By the time the train pulled from the station, Bromley Hall was already fading into the distance behind him. But the memory of it, its secrets, its tragedies, and its quiet redemption, remained clear, and somewhere, beyond the sea, the echo of Alice Penwell's truth continued on, undimmed. The train's rhythmic clatter lulled the countryside into a slow drift past the window, but Poirot sat unmoved, upright in his seat, as though braced for a verdict yet to come. Though the mystery at Bromley Hall had been, in its outward form, resolved, a peculiar unease lingered at the edge of his thoughts. It was not doubt. None, not precisely. Poirot had traced each thread to its frayed end. The facts had been neatly folded, the evidence aligned. But still, something tugged, light as a forgotten breeze brushing the back of the neck. He opened his valise, drew out his notebook again, and turned not to the last entry, but several pages earlier. There he had diagrammed the sequence of events, the theft, or hiding, of the Jade Rosary, the death of Alice Penwell, the misplaced bottle of poison, the confrontation, the confession. Yet as he scanned it again, a single inconsistency stared back at him. The rosary. It had been hidden, that he accepted, by Alice, likely at Benedict's urging, and yet, when asked where it had been concealed, no one had offered a location. Not Lady Bromley, not the inspector. The object at the centre of it all, sacred, storied, symbolic, had not been found. That could mean only one thing. It was still missing. And if it was still missing, Poirot reasoned, then either Benedict had not retrieved it, or someone else had. He folded the notebook and leaned back, eyes narrowing as the clouds outside broke for a moment over a coppery horizon. There was always one detail left behind, one movement concealed by shadow. In this case, the final secret had not been revealed by guilt or deduction, but perhaps by silence that still held its breath. Upon arriving in London, Poirot made no detour to Whitehaven Mansions. Instead, he took a cab directly to Scotland Yard and asked to speak privately with Inspector Japp. Japp entered the meeting room with a bemused expression, his sleeves rolled to the elbow. "Don't tell me Winmere's turned up another murder." Poirot smiled faintly. "No, mon ami. I do not come bearing bodies, only questions." Japp sat, pouring tea into 2 chipped cups. "Go on, then." Poirot leaned forward. "Imagine, if you will, that the murder is solved, the killer confessed, and the household restored to peace. And yet, an object central to the entire chain of events is never recovered." Japp tilted his head. "The rosary?" "Just so. There was no mention in the final report of where it was found, no discussion of its return to Lady Bromley, no indication that Alice's hiding place was uncovered." Japp frowned. "You think someone still has it?" "I think someone took advantage of the commotion to retrieve it, or perhaps never let it out of their possession in the first place." Japp scratched his chin. "Would it be worth stealing? Sentimental value, sure, but not worth dying over, surely." Poirot's brow rose. "Ah, but that is where you misunderstand. The Jade Rosary is priceless in 2 ways. One emotional, certainly, but the other quite literal. It was carved from imperial jade, each bead engraved with dynastic symbols. Quietly, discreetly, it could fetch a small fortune from the right collector." Japp muttered a curse under his breath. "So, you're telling me it wasn't just a symbol of family loyalty, but a genuine temptation?" Poirot nodded. "Precisely. And now that the murderer is in custody, and the staff believe the case to be over, we may see who begins to grow careless." Japp stood. "You want surveillance?" "No, not quite. I want an inventory of every item that left Bromley Hall in the past 3 days. Luggage, trunks, gift boxes. I want to know if anything has been shipped, transferred, or handed over to third parties. Begin with the housekeeper, then the doctor, then the young master himself." Japp was already reaching for the telephone. Poirot stood. "Merci, mon ami. I believe we are about to uncover the last knot in the tapestry." 2 days later, the call came. Poirot sat in his study with his morning tisane when the bell rang, followed by the clipped voice of Inspector Japp. You were right. Poirot's moustache twitched. But of course, which particular detail? The rosary. We traced a parcel sent from the village post office just after your departure, registered to a forwarding address in Dover, where it was then placed aboard a steamer bound for Antwerp. Poirot stood, his teacup forgotten. And the sender? Name listed as Mrs. B. Griffiths, but the handwriting, it's Benedict Bromley's. There was a long pause. Japp added, Do you want him brought in? Poirot walked to the window, looking out at the late autumn fog curling over the Thames. No, he said at last. Not yet. Tell Lady Bromley, quietly. Let us see what she chooses to do. He hung up the receiver and stood very still. The revelation didn't shock him, not truly, but it wounded him in a way no deception had in years. Benedict had acted out of fear, yes, out of familial loyalty perhaps, but to mail the rosary, to attempt to sell it beyond England's shores, that was not the act of a frightened boy. That was calculated. That was greed. The lie that Alice had died protecting was larger than either of them had understood. Poirot returned to his desk and opened his notebook once more. Beneath Alice's name, he wrote a final line. Even the innocent cast shadows. That evening, a letter arrived. The envelope was pressed with Lady Bromley's personal seal. Poirot opened it with care. Monsieur Poirot, I have confronted my son. He confessed to the posting of the rosary. He claims he intended to recover it abroad, to prevent it from being returned here, where he believed it would only bring shame and ruin. I do not excuse this action, but I have made a choice. The shipment was intercepted. The object has been returned. I will not press charges. My son will not inherit the estate. Instead, I shall place it in trust for the 2 children Alice loved. They will grow in a house that remembers the cost of silence. Let it end here. Lady Evelyn Bromley Poirot folded the letter slowly, as though tucking away a wound. He made no reply. None was needed. Some truths, he knew, were best sealed with dignity rather than exposed with fanfare. And sometimes justice, real justice, was not a verdict handed down by the courts, but a mother's quiet decision, made at the edge of disgrace, in favor of redemption. Poirot rose, drew the curtain against the night, and turned once more to his quiet, precise world, where every mystery, eventually, came home. It was 2 weeks later when the final envelope arrived. Pale cream, thick stock, embossed not with a crest, but with a name, handwritten in a careful, looping script, Benedict Bromley. The postmark was Oxford, the writing unmistakably his. Poirot recognized it at once, not with alarm, but with an odd heaviness, like the arrival of a guest long expected and long avoided. He slit it open neatly with a letter knife and unfolded the single sheet within. The salutation was formal, Monsieur Poirot, but the tone beneath it was quietly raw, stripped of youthful arrogance or the poetic airs of a university mind. I have debated for days whether to write to you, but in the end, it is the only thing left for me to do honestly. I know you must think me a coward, or worse, a thief. I will not dispute it. I sent the rosary away. I had it with me the entire time. Alice never knew the truth. She believed she hid it for me, but it was I who had already hidden it from her. I used her trust to shield my own fear. That is something I will carry for the rest of my life. Poirot paused in his reading, his gaze lifting to the window, where a fine rain dusted the sill. So Alice had died not knowing. She had protected Benedict even as he had let her believe a lie. A deep sadness moved through him, not anger, but something more complicated. The betrayal of trust, yes, but also the tragedy of love unspoken and of truths never granted the dignity of daylight. I told myself at the time that it was to protect my mother, that if the rosary was missing, And if no one could find it, then at least the scandal would pass without names attached. I told myself I had no intention of selling it, that I simply wanted it gone. But that was a lie, too. There was a buyer in Antwerp. I'd contacted him weeks before the weekend at the hall. I was desperate. I had debts. I believed no one would understand. And then Alice found the letter, the communication. I don't know how. Perhaps she dusted my suitcase or found the paper by accident. But she knew. She confronted me in the garden. She was frightened, not angry, not cruel, just frightened. For me, she said she would not tell my mother, that she would take care of it, hide the rosary, protect me. She believed, truly believed, that if she took the blame, no one would suspect I was involved. And I let her. Poirot read this part slowly, letting each line settle like dust in his mind. It was the moment everything had turned, not when the rosary had disappeared, not even when Alice had died, but here, in the garden, where the opportunity to tell the truth had been offered like a hand, and refused. I had many chances to tell you the truth, Monsieur Poirot, but you see, I couldn't bear to watch you realize what kind of person I really was. You see so much, too much, but you have a way of seeing through a person, without cruelty, and that frightened me more than anything. I knew you would not arrest me, that you would leave the decision to my mother. And so you did, and now I live with her decision every morning. I've withdrawn from Oxford. I live quietly, helping manage the estate's minor holdings under supervision. I have no inheritance, no title to await me, only a name, and the memory of someone who deserved better than what I gave her. I do not ask for your forgiveness, only that you understand how fear and weakness look so very much like cleverness in a mirror. Thank you for seeing me truly, even when I refused to do the same. Benedict Bromley. Poirot folded the letter carefully and slid it back into its envelope. He did not place it in his file on the Bromley affair. He did not catalogue it with the other curiosities he kept. No newspaper clipping, no scribbled analysis on the back. Instead, he opened the drawer to the left of his writing desk, drew out the pressed violet he had taken from Alice's locket, and slipped the envelope beneath it. There, it would remain. Outside, the rain thickened, turning the city into a painting of blurred greys and lamp-glow. Poirot stood and moved to the hearth, stirring the embers until a small flame resumed its shape. The heat bloomed gently, brushing against the stillness of the room. So the last word had come not from justice, but from remorse. And Poirot, who had long relied on psychology as his compass, knew that there were crimes for which no court would ever convene, crimes committed in the silence between two people, in the helplessness of good intentions misused. Benedict had not killed Alice, but he had allowed her to step into the path of suspicion. He had accepted her protection and let her perish within it. Yet Poirot also understood. If remorse endured, it might become redemption. And redemption, though never a certainty, was the one ending a detective could never manufacture. It had to grow from within. He returned to his desk and, after a pause, picked up his pen. In his private journal, not the official casebook, he wrote a final entry under the affair at the Jade Rosary. Some endings are not solved, but surrendered. The heart does not follow the logic of the little grey cells, but where conscience remains, even the smallest act of truth may become a bridge back from disgrace. The rosary is returned, the household altered, the silence undone. Let it be so. He placed the pen down, not with finality, but with calm. In the stillness of the study, with rain tapping at the windows and firelight flickering low, Poirot sat back in his chair and let the quiet settle once again, not as a weight, but as a balm. The case, at last, was closed. The lamps on Whitehaven Mansion's quiet street had just flickered on, casting soft golden halos on the slick pavement below. When Hercule Poirot stepped back from his window and closed the curtains for the evening. The fire crackled gently in the grate, and the faint ticking of his clock marked the last minutes of twilight. Everything was in order. His desk, his cuffs, the single rosebud in the vase beside his chair. And yet, it was not the rhythm of routine that occupied his mind. It was Alice Penwell. Not her death. No, that chapter had long been written, but what remained after it, the quiet, irreversible shift in the lives of those who had underestimated her or trusted her too late. The rosary had returned. The household had healed in its way. And Benedict Bromley, stripped of his inheritance and the illusions that once protected him, was beginning the slow, painful work of atonement. That, Poirot knew, was as just an ending as any court might deliver. But what stayed with him, what always stayed with him, was the girl herself. Not the victim, but the soul at the center of it all. In a world that prized order and pedigree and the illusion of gentility, it had been Alice who'd shown the greatest bravery. It was she who had recognized the fracture beneath the family's porcelain surface. She who had tried to patch it with silence rather than spectacle. Not out of fear, but love. A love that went unnoticed until it was too late. And that, he thought, was the true crime. Not the theft, not even the poison, but the fact that no one had truly seen her until she was gone. Poirot rose from his chair and walked slowly to the bookshelf. He retrieved the slim, cloth-bound journal, where he recorded only the rarest of observations. Not deductions, but reflections. Matters of the heart, of justice, of moral ambiguity. He opened to a fresh page, and with deliberate strokes of his fountain pen, began to write, "Let it be remembered, justice is not merely the punishment of the guilty, but the honoring of the innocent. In the case of Alice Penwell, the law was never meant for her. She broke none. And yet she paid with everything she had, to protect a family not her own, to shield a boy not brave enough to face truth. She died not of poison, but of trust misplaced. But through her, the truth emerged. The silence was broken, and the legacy of Bromley Hall, once corrupted by pride and secrecy, now rests in the hands of two children she loved more than herself. It is enough." He closed the journal and replaced it on the shelf. The fire had begun to settle into glowing embers. Poirot straightened his tie, smoothed the crease on his trousers, and allowed himself a final glance at the rain-spattered glass. Then, with the calm that comes only to those who have seen the worst in people and still chosen to believe in their better angels, Hercule Poirot turned off the lamp and stepped quietly into the night. The affair at the Jade Rosary was over, but its lesson would endure.